He thought it was just a sword, until the moment Auric thrust the black blade into Princess Althea's quantum sarcophagus. A blinding flash erupted as her star-like eyes snapped open after 2 centuries of slumber. "Give it back," she commanded, rising with otherworldly grace to confront the warlord who sought to enslave her consciousness and unleash catastrophe upon the world. The reddish glow of Verdania's twin suns cast an eerie light through the radiation fog that perpetually hung over the ruins of Lyria. What had once been called the Glass City, with its towering crystalline spires reaching toward the heavens, now stood as jagged remnants of a forgotten era. Broken towers pierced the skyline like the teeth of some ancient beast, their once pristine surfaces cracked and dulled by 2 centuries of abandonment. Auric Vale adjusted his filtration mask and wiped the sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of grime across his forehead. The radiation levels weren't lethal here, not anymore, but they were high enough to make extended exposure uncomfortable. His dark hair was pulled back in a utilitarian knot, and his eyes, a striking blue that seemed almost luminescent against his dust-covered skin, surveyed the crumbling structure before him. "Vale!" The sharp voice of his supervisor crackled through his comm unit. "You've got 4 hours before the next radiation surge. Make it count." Auric tapped his earpiece once in acknowledgement. 4 hours was barely enough time to catalog the entrance to the archaeological site, let alone explore it properly. But that was how things worked in 2425. 200 years after the Great Catastrophe, humanity clung to the edges of what had once been magnificent cities, scavenging what they could from the bones of their ancestors' achievements. He was a mechanical repair technician by trade, specializing in mining operations. But archaeological expeditions paid better. And, in the wasteland economy of post-catastrophe Verdania, credits were everything. Credits bought clean water, uncontaminated food, and most importantly to Auric, information. Information about the past, about the golden age when Verdania had been a jewel among the stars, a beacon of technological advancement and prosperity. Something about this particular site had set his supervisor's greed sensors tingling. The corporations that now governed what remained of civilization were always hungry for artifacts from the golden age. Technology that could be reverse-engineered, art that could be sold to the elite who lived in orbital habitats far above the contaminated surface, or weapons that could shift the balance of power among the corporate territories. Auric stepped carefully over a fallen column, its once perfect geometric engravings now worn and faded. His scanner beeped softly, indicating a hollow space beneath the rubble. This wasn't just another collapsed building. It was an entrance to something deeper, something that had been sealed away beneath the city. "Found the access point," he reported, setting down his equipment and pulling out a compact excavation drone. The small machine hummed to life, its cutting lasers making short work of the debris, blocking what appeared to be a doorway. As the last of the rubble cleared, Auric shone his light into the darkness below. Unlike most ruins in Lyria, this one showed signs of deliberate sealing, not a collapse from the catastrophe, but an intentional burial. That was unusual, and unusual meant valuable. "I'm going in," he announced, not waiting for permission. The narrow passage sloped downward, ancient emergency lighting flickering weakly to life as his presence triggered long, dormant motion sensors. The technology of the Golden Age might be 2 centuries old, but it had been built to last. The passage widened into a large chamber, its walls covered in what appeared to be a combination of advanced circuitry and ornate, almost ritualistic carvings. Auric had seen similar integration of technology and mysticism in other Golden Age sites. The people of that time had reached such technological heights that the line between science and magic had blurred in the minds of many. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, untouched by time or decay, and upon it lay a sword. Auric approached cautiously, his scanner sweeping for traps or radiation hotspots. The sword was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its blade was pure black, seeming to drink in the light from his helmet lamp, rather than reflect it. The hilt was made of some crystalline material that pulsed with a faint, internal glow, like a heartbeat barely sustained. "Veil to base. I've found something," he said, circling the pedestal. "Appears to be a ceremonial weapon of some kind. No radiation signature, no apparent defensive systems." "Can you extract it?" his supervisor asked, the eagerness in her voice barely concealed. Auric hesitated. There was something about the sword that made him uneasy, a feeling he couldn't rationalize. He'd recovered dozens of artifacts before, without this sense of... was it dread or reverence? "I'm assessing now," he replied, buying time to study the chamber more thoroughly. The walls told a story in their engravings, figures that appeared to be warriors or perhaps royalty, wielding what looked like the same sword that lay before him. And among them, repeated in several panels, was a woman with a crown of light, mounted upon what could only be described as a dragon, though Auric knew such creatures had never existed on Verdania, at least, not according to official history. His curiosity overcame his caution. He reached out and grasped the hilt of the sword. The moment his fingers closed around the crystalline material, a wave of resonant energy surged through the chamber. The walls trembled, ancient dust raining down as hairline fractures in the stone pulsed with an unearthly blue light. The sword itself remained cool to the touch, but Auric felt a strange vibration travel up his arm, as though the weapon were somehow assessing him. And then he heard it, a whisper, so faint it might have been the wind through the ruins above. Except there was no wind here, deep underground. "Return what is mine." Auric nearly dropped the sword in shock. The voice had seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Before he could react further, a deep rumbling shook the chamber. The entrance through which he had come suddenly sealed itself, massive stone slabs sliding into place with the grinding finality of a tomb being closed. "Veil, Veil, do you copy?" His supervisor's voice was frantic in his ear, breaking up through increasing interference. "We're reading seismic activity. Get out of there now." "The entrance is sealed," Auric replied, trying to keep his voice steady as he searched for another way out. "Something triggered a security system. My tracker's going dark too. You're breaking up. Immediate traction." The communication dissolved into static and then silence. Alone in the chamber, with only his helmet lamp and the pulsing glow of the sword for illumination, Auric felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground temperature. "Return what is mine." The voice was clearer now, unmistakably female, resonant with authority and something else. Pain, perhaps, or longing. Auric held the sword before him, both as a potential weapon and as a light source. "Who's there?" he demanded, scanning the shadows. "Show yourself!" No response came except the continued trembling of the chamber. Auric spotted a narrow passage on the far side, previously hidden in darkness. With no other options, he moved toward it, the sword clutched tightly in his right hand, his scanner in his left. The passage led deeper into the earth, descending in a spiral that seemed to go on forever. The walls here were different, less ornate, more functional, with occasional panels of what appeared to be ancient computer terminals. Long dead, every few meters. Auric passed small alcoves containing desiccated remains of what might have been guardians, or perhaps unfortunate explorers who had come before him. After what felt like hours of descent, the passage leveled out into a vast underground complex. Auric's lamp could not penetrate the full extent of the darkness, but his scanner indicated open space extending for at least a kilometer in all directions. This was no mere burial chamber or weapons cache. This was an entire underground city. As he took his first steps into the open space, lights began to activate in sequence, illuminating a sight that stole his breath away. Towering structures of crystal and metal rose from the cavern floor. their architecture more advanced and yet more organic than anything in the ruins above. Bridges of what appeared to be solid light connected various levels, and at the center of it all stood a massive circular platform, like a ceremonial dais or perhaps a launch pad. "What is this place?" Arik whispered to himself, momentarily forgetting the danger of his situation in the face of such wonder. The sword in his hand pulsed more intensely, as if responding to his question, or perhaps to the reactivation of the underground city. The voice returned, echoing throughout the vast space. "The last sanctuary, the final hope, now defiled by a thief." Arik spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. "I'm not a thief," he called out. "I'm an explorer, an archaeologist. I mean no harm. Yet you take what is not yours," the voice accused, now seeming to come from directly behind him. Arik turned again, but saw only empty air. His heart raced as he realized the voice must be coming from the sword itself, or perhaps from whatever intelligence controlled this place, using the sword as a conduit. "I didn't know it belonged to anyone still living," he responded, choosing his words carefully. "I'll return it to its rightful place, but I need to find a way out of here first." A sound like cold laughter reverberated through the chamber. "Living. Death and life are more complex than you understand, little thief." Before Arik could respond, a rumbling different from the earlier tremors caught his attention. From the far side of the underground city, something was approaching, something large and mechanical. The ground shook with each impact, and Arik could make out the silhouette of what appeared to be a massive guardian construct, its ancient weapon systems powering up with an ominous hum. "Shit," Arik muttered, breaking into a run toward the nearest structure that might offer shelter. The sword in his hand seemed to grow lighter, almost guiding his movements as he ducked into a narrow alleyway between crystalline buildings. The Guardian's thunderous footsteps grew closer, and Arik pressed himself against a wall, trying to control his breathing. His mind raced through options. He couldn't outrun the construct, couldn't hide forever, and certainly couldn't fight it with nothing but a mysterious sword and his repair tools. As if responding to his thoughts, the sword pulsed again, and a section of the wall behind him slid open, revealing a hidden passage. Without hesitation, Arik dove through, the panel closing silently behind him, just as the Guardian's massive form passed by his hiding place. The new passage was different from the others, its walls lined with what appeared to be data storage units, glowing with faint life. At regular intervals, Arik passed display panels showing diagrams of what could only be described as a quantum sarcophagus, containing a humanoid figure in suspended animation. And everywhere, there were inscriptions, not in any language Arik recognized, but somehow, when he focused on them, impressions formed in his mind, fragments about a Princess Althea, about dragon riders, about a quantum curse, and a sacrifice to save the world. After following the passage for several minutes, Arik emerged into a smaller chamber that appeared to be a control room of sorts. Ancient terminals lined the walls, and at the center stood a holographic display projector, inactive but apparently intact. "Hello," a voice, a human voice, not the ethereal one from before, called out from somewhere nearby, making Arik nearly jump out of his skin. "Who's there?" he demanded, raising the sword defensively. A panel on the far side of the room slid open, and a figure emerged, hands raised in a gesture of peace. It was a woman, clad in the dust-stained coveralls of a mechanical engineer, her red hair pulled back in a practical braid, face smudged with grease and dirt. "Don't stab me, please," she said, eyeing the sword with a mixture of wariness and fascination. "I'm Elaine Mercer, Corp-certified engineer, level 4. I was mapping the northeastern sector when the tremors started. Got cut off from my team." Arik lowered the sword slightly, but remained guarded. "Arik Vale, Mech Repair and Archaeological Recovery. What corporation?" "Nexus Technologies," she replied, lowering her hands slowly. You? Independent contractor for Archaeotech. He relaxed marginally. Nexus and Archaeotech weren't openly hostile to each other, at least not at the moment. How did you get down here? This level was sealed until just now. Elaine gestured to her equipment belt, which held an impressive array of custom tools. I've got a knack for opening things that don't want to be opened. Been exploring these ruins for months. Her eyes fixed on the sword in his hand. Where did you find that? Before Arik could answer, the holographic projector in the center of the room flickered to life, casting the chamber in a blue glow. A three-dimensional map of the underground complex appeared, with one section pulsing red. Elaine approached it cautiously. It's showing us something, a location. She studied the map intently, then glanced at the inscriptions on the walls. You can't read these, can you? Arik shook his head. Not exactly. I get impressions. Something about a princess. A curse. Elaine nodded, unsurprised. It's ancient Lyrian script, mixed with quantum computational code. I've been studying it. She traced her fingers over the characters, muttering to herself. This is incredible. It says the sword is a soul tether, that it binds a living consciousness to a physical anchor. The sword pulsed in Arik's hand, as if confirming her translation. It's been talking to me, Arik admitted. A woman's voice, demanding I return it. Elaine's eyes widened. The Princess Althea, she whispered. The legends say she sacrificed herself to save Lyria from destruction during the final war of the Golden Age. But what if she didn't die? What if she used quantum technology to preserve herself somehow, bound to this sword? A distant boom echoed through the complex, followed by the sound of crumbling stone and bending metal. What was that? Arik asked, gripping the sword tighter. Elaine's expression darkened. Trouble. We're not the only ones down here. There's a gang that's been raiding these ruins. They call themselves the Toxic Vein, led by a brute named Vark. They've been hunting for something big, something they believe will give them control over old Lyria's defensive systems. Like this sword? Arik guessed. Exactly like that sword, Elaine confirmed. We need to move. If they've breached this level, they'll be heading for the central chamber, the Sun Temple. That's where the map is pointing anyway. If there are answers about what that sword is and how to get out of here, that's where we'll find them. Another explosion, closer this time, emphasized the urgency of her words. Without further discussion, they headed for the exit. Elaine leading the way through the labyrinthine passages, with a familiarity that suggested she'd spent far more time exploring these ruins than she'd initially let on. As they navigated the abandoned city, Arik found himself studying his unexpected companion. Elaine moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, her eyes constantly scanning for threats or opportunities. She was clearly more than just a corporate engineer. You know an awful lot about this place for someone who was just mapping the northeastern sector, Arik commented as they paused at a junction. Elaine consulting what appeared to be a hand-drawn map. She gave him a sideways glance, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. And you found the most important artifact in the entire complex on your first expedition. We've all got our secrets. Vale. Before he could press her further, a skittering sound from overhead made them both freeze. Arik directed his lamp upward, illuminating a horrifying sight. Clinging to the ceiling was a creature that might once have been human, its limbs elongated and twisted, skin translucent enough to reveal mutated organs pulsing beneath. Radiation mutations were common enough on the surface, but this was something else, something older and more deliberate, as if the creature had been engineered as a guardian. The mutation's head swiveled toward them, eyes milky white but clearly tracking their movement. It opened a mouth filled with needle-like teeth and emitted a high-pitched shriek that echoed through the corridors. "Run!" Elaine hissed, pulling Auric down a side passage as the creature detached from the ceiling and began scuttling toward them with unnatural speed. They sprinted through the abandoned city, the creature's shrieks now joined by others, a chorus of inhuman sounds converging on their position. Auric's breath came in ragged gasps, his equipment weighing him down. The sword, however, felt impossibly light in his hand, almost as if it were pulling him forward, guiding him through the maze. "Left here!" Elaine called, dragging him down another corridor. "There's a defensive barrier ahead. If we can reach it, those things won't follow." They rounded a corner and found themselves facing a shimmering curtain of energy that bisected the passage. Beyond it, the architecture changed, becoming more ceremonial, with intricate patterns etched into the walls and floor. "How do we get through?" Auric panted, looking back over his shoulder at the approaching sounds of pursuit. Elaine pointed at the sword. "That's your key. It's a royal artifact. It should grant passage." Hesitantly, Auric extended the sword toward the barrier. The black blade slid through the energy field as if it were made of the same substance, and the barrier rippled, creating an opening just large enough for them to pass through. They ducked through the gap, and the instant they were clear, the barrier solidified again with a sound like a thunderclap. Moments later, the first of the mutated guardians slammed into the energy field, hissing and clawing in fury as it found itself unable to pass. Others quickly joined it, creating a nightmarish tableau of twisted limbs and gnashing teeth on the other side of the shimmering barrier. Auric and Elaine backed away, catching their breath. "What were those things?" Auric asked, unable to tear his gaze from the monstrosities. "Guardian constructs," Elaine replied, her voice clinical despite her rapid breathing. "Biological weapons from the last war, fused with quantum technology. They protect the deeper levels from intruders." "But the sword let us pass," Auric noted, looking down at the weapon that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Because it recognizes you as having authority here," Elaine said, studying him with renewed interest. "Which is unusual. The quantum authentication systems were coded to royal genetic markers. You shouldn't have been able to activate it at all, let alone use it as a passkey." Before Auric could ponder the implications of this, a new sound reached them, the unmistakable rhythm of military-grade boots on stone, accompanied by the whine of energy weapons powering up. "That'll be Vark and his toxic vein thugs," Elaine whispered, pulling Auric into the shadows of a nearby alcove. "They must have followed us down." They pressed themselves against the wall as a group of figures appeared at the far end of the corridor. A dozen men and women in mismatched armor, scavenged from various corporate security forces, all heavily armed. At their head strode a massive man whose very presence seemed to dominate the space around him. His face was partially obscured by a respirator mask, but his eyes were visible, cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless. "Spread out and find them," the leader ordered, his voice distorted by his mask, but unmistakably commanding. "The sensors detected a quantum activation in this sector. The girl knows these ruins. She'll be headed for the central chamber. Cut them off." As the group dispersed, Elaine tugged at Auric's sleeve, pointing to a narrow maintenance shaft barely visible in the wall behind them. Without a word, they squeezed into the tight space, pulling a concealing panel closed behind them, just as two of Vark's thugs passed by their hiding place. The shaft was cramped and dusty, clearly designed for automated maintenance drones rather than human access. They crawled in silence for what felt like an eternity, the only sound their controlled breathing and the occasional distant shout from the toxic vein gang members searching for them. Eventually, the shaft widened into a small maintenance room filled with ancient equipment. Elaine sealed the entrance behind them and slumped against a console, exhaustion evident in her posture. "We can rest here for a moment," she said, pulling a water flask from her belt and taking a sip before offering it to Auric. "They won't find this place. It's not on any of the accessible maps." Auric accepted the water gratefully. "Who are you, really?" he asked directly, You're no corporate engineer. Elaine met his gaze steadily. I was once. Now I'm what you might call an independent researcher. My specialty is quantum archaeology, specifically the integration of consciousness with technology that was pioneered during the Golden Age. And you've been studying this place because the legends of Princess Althea have always been more than just stories, she replied, her eyes bright with fervor. The historical records speak of a woman who rode a dragon, which most scholars dismiss as metaphorical. But what if it wasn't? What if the dragons were biological mechanical constructs created through the same quantum technology that apparently bound Althea's consciousness to that sword you're carrying? The sword pulsed at the mention of Althea's name, a gentle warmth spreading through the hilt into Arik's hand. You believe she's still alive somehow? After 200 years? Arik's skepticism was evident in his tone. Not alive in the conventional sense, Elaine clarified, but conscious, preserved. The quantum technologies of the Golden Age were capable of things we can barely comprehend today. They had begun to unlock the fundamental nature of consciousness itself, to find ways to preserve it independently of biological functions. Arik looked down at the sword with new understanding. So this isn't just a weapon. It's her... what? Her soul. A tether for her consciousness, Elaine corrected. A physical anchor that prevented her from fully transitioning to whatever comes after death. The inscriptions suggest she bound herself voluntarily, as part of a ritual to seal away something catastrophic, perhaps the very thing that later caused the Great Catastrophe. A distant explosion shook dust from the ceiling, reminding them of their pursuers. We need to keep moving, Elaine said, gathering her equipment. The central chamber, the Sun Temple, is where all of this began. If we can reach it, we might find a way to communicate properly with Althea, maybe even fulfill whatever task she requires to release her consciousness. And escape this place, Arik added, his practical concerns not entirely overshadowed by the historical mystery. That too, Elaine agreed with a grim smile. They continued their journey through increasingly ornate passages, the architecture shifting from utilitarian to ceremonial. The walls here were covered in elaborate murals depicting scenes from Lyria's golden past, spacecraft launching toward distant stars, great cities rising from barren landscapes, and always, recurring throughout, the image of the dragon-riding princess, her sword raised against a darkness that seemed to consume everything in its path. As they descended deeper, Arik felt the sword growing warmer, its pulses more frequent, as if excited or anxious. The voice he had heard earlier remained silent, but there was a palpable sense of anticipation building within the weapon. They were nearing a vast circular chamber when the sound of weapons fire echoed from ahead. Arik and Elaine froze, then cautiously crept forward to peer around a corner. The sight that greeted them made Arik's blood run cold. The Sun Temple, for it could be nothing else, spread before them in breathtaking magnificence. A circular chamber, hundreds of meters across, its dome ceiling painted with constellations that slowly rotated, creating the illusion of the night sky. At its center stood a raised platform surrounded by concentric rings of what appeared to be quantum processors, their surfaces etched with the same combination of ancient script and computational code they had seen throughout the complex. And atop the platform, a transparent sarcophagus, glowing with internal light. But it was the scene playing out around this magnificent setting that filled Arik with dread. Vark and his toxic vein gang had reached the chamber before them, and they were engaged in a firefight with another group, corporate security forces, in the distinctive black and silver of Nexus Tech. Bodies already lay scattered across the temple floor, and the air was thick with weapons discharge and the acrid smell of burned circuitry. Elaine cursed under her breath. "My extraction team," she whispered. "They must have followed my tracker's last signal." "Some engineer you are," Arik muttered, but there was no real accusation in his tone. They were all playing their own angles here. "We need to reach that sarcophagus," Elaine said, pointing to the central platform. "If my translations are correct, that's where Althea's physical form has been preserved all these years. The sword is the key to awakening her, or at least to establishing proper communication with her consciousness." Auric eyed the ongoing battle skeptically. "And how exactly do we do that without getting shot to pieces?" As if in answer, the sword in his hand suddenly blazed with blue light, illuminating their hiding place and drawing the attention of both warring factions. For a moment, all combat ceased as every eye turned toward the unexpected glow. "There!" Vark's voice boomed across the chamber. "The thief has the key! Take him alive!" The brief ceasefire ended as abruptly as it had begun. But now both sides were converging on Auric and Elaine's position, forcing them out into the open. "Run for the platform!" Elaine shouted, drawing a compact energy pistol from her belt and firing covering shots as they broke from cover. Auric sprinted across the temple floor, the sword leading him forward with an urgency he could feel in his very bones. Energy bolts sizzled past him, scorching the ancient stone where they impacted. He heard Elaine cry out behind him, but couldn't risk stopping to look back. He reached the first ring of processors and vaulted over them, feeling a strange sensation as he passed through what must have been some kind of energy field. Behind him, several pursuers slammed into an invisible barrier, unable to follow. The sword was indeed acting as a key, granting him passage while denying it to others. Elaine appeared at his side a moment later, clutching her shoulder where an energy bolt had grazed her. "Keep going," she gasped. "The inner rings will have stronger defenses." They pressed on, passing through two more concentric barriers, each stopping more of their pursuers until only Vark himself remained in pursuit, using the considerable firepower of his modified assault cannon to blast through the weakened defensive fields. Finally, Auric and Elaine reached the central platform, standing before the quantum sarcophagus that dominated it. Inside, barely visible through the glowing field that surrounded it, lay a woman in what appeared to be state robes, her features serene in suspended animation, a crown of crystalline material adorning her brow. Despite 2 centuries of entombment, she looked as though she might awaken from a brief nap at any moment. The sword in Auric's hand blazed even brighter, pulling him toward the sarcophagus with a force he could barely resist. "What do I do?" he shouted to Elaine, over the continued sounds of battle beyond the defensive rings. "Place the sword on the pedestal," she called back, gesturing to a small platform beside the sarcophagus that was clearly designed to hold the weapon. It should establish a connection between her consciousness in the sword and her physical form. Before Auric could comply, a massive impact shook the platform. Vark had breached the final barrier, his imposing figure silhouetted against the flashes of weapons fire beyond. His respirator mask had been damaged in the fighting, revealing a face scarred by radiation burns and twisted into a triumphant sneer. "Hand over the key, boy," he demanded, leveling his assault cannon at Auric's chest. "You have no idea what power you're meddling with." "And you do," Auric challenged, keeping the sword firmly in his grip. Vark's scarred lips curved into a cold smile. "I've spent years studying the quantum archives, learning the secrets of the Golden Age. That sword is the control key for Lyria's entire defensive network. With it, I can reactivate the war machines, the atmospheric processors. I can rule what's left of this world." "You're insane," Elaine spat. Her energy pistol trained on Vark, despite the futility of such a small weapon against his armored form. "That sword contains a living consciousness. You can't use it as a tool for your megalomaniacal fantasies." Vark laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "The consciousness is the point. Engineer. The quantum authentication systems require a royal command structure. Althea's consciousness will be enslaved to my will, forced to execute my commands through the network she once controlled." With surprising speed for such a large man, Vark lunged forward, knocking Elaine aside and grabbing Auric by the throat. His armored fingers tightened, cutting off Arik's air supply as he tried to wrest the sword from his grasp. The sword chooses its wielder. Arik gasped, feeling the weapon grow hot in his hand, almost burning now. Then I'll take the wielder's hand with it, Vark growled, raising his assault cannon to sever Arik's arm at the wrist. In that moment of extremity, acting purely on instinct, Arik thrust the sword toward the quantum sarcophagus. The black blade pierced the energy field surrounding it, connecting with the crown upon the sleeping woman's brow. A blinding flash of light erupted from the point of contact, accompanied by a shockwave that threw both Arik and Vark backward. The entire chamber shook, ancient dust raining down from the domed ceiling as systems that had lain dormant for 2 centuries suddenly surged to life. The energy field around the sarcophagus collapsed in a cascade of sparks, and the transparent cover slid open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the woman within the sarcophagus opened her eyes. They were eyes unlike any Arik had ever seen, pools of swirling, luminescent blue, like the heart of a star captured in human form. She sat up with fluid grace, her movements unhurried yet precise, as if she had merely been waiting for this moment, rather than suspended in time for 2 centuries. Her gaze swept the chamber, taking in the scene of battle now frozen in stunned silence, before settling on Arik, who still clutched the sword despite his sprawled position on the floor. When she spoke, her voice was the same one he had heard earlier, but now amplified, resonant with power that seemed to vibrate the very air. "Give it back." She extended her hand toward Arik, palm up, an unmistakable command in the gesture. But before he could respond, Vark recovered from his momentary shock and leveled his assault cannon at the newly awakened princess. "You will serve me," he declared, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty despite his bravado. "The quantum network recognizes the royal authentication. You will give me control of Lyria's defenses." Princess Althea turned her luminous gaze to Vark, her expression one of cold contempt. "You understand nothing of what you seek to control," she said, her voice now soft but somehow more terrifying for its quietness. "The network is not a weapon to be wielded. It is a prison, a seal upon a darkness you cannot comprehend." With a speed that defied human limitation, she moved from the sarcophagus to stand before Vark, her hand closing around the barrel of his weapon before he could fire. Metal crumpled under her grip like paper, the weapon's power core going dark. 200 years I have slumbered, my consciousness split between sword and flesh, maintaining the quantum seal that keeps the void plague contained, she continued, her voice rising as a nimbus of blue energy began to form around her. "And you would break that seal for power? For dominion over ruins?" Vark stumbled backward, fear replacing arrogance in his eyes. "What are you?" he whispered. "I am the last queen of Lyria," Althea replied, the energy around her intensifying. "The final dragon rider, the quantum guardian, and you." She made a gesture with her hand, and Vark froze in place, his body enveloped in a field of shimmering stasis. "You are nothing but a footnote in a history you cannot change." With Vark immobilized, she turned her attention back to Arik, who had risen to his feet, the sword still in his hand but now held loosely, no longer in a defensive posture. "You activated my sarcophagus," she observed, studying him with those unsettling stellar eyes. "The sword accepted your touch, allowed you to wield it. This should not have been possible unless—" She stepped closer, reaching out to touch his face with fingers that felt oddly warm despite their slight transparency. "Yes, I see it now, a distant echo of the royal bloodline, diluted by generations, but present nonetheless, a descendant of those I left behind." Arik found his voice at last. "I don't understand any of this. I'm just a mechanic, a scavenger." A smile touched Althea's lips, surprisingly human despite her otherworldly appearance. No one is just anything. Auric Vale. We are all composites of our choices and our heritage, our actions and our potential. She held out her hand once more. Now, my sword, if you please. It contains the greater part of my consciousness, and I am incomplete without it. Auric hesitated only briefly before placing the weapon in her outstretched palm. The moment it touched her skin, the sword's black blade blazed with the same blue light that surrounded Althea herself. She closed her eyes in what appeared to be relief or pleasure, the reunion of sword and wielder clearly significant beyond the physical. When she opened her eyes again, they seemed even more vibrant, more present. "Thank you," she said, inclining her head slightly. Few would willingly surrender such power once grasped. "It was never mine to keep," Auric replied simply. Elaine had recovered from Vark's attack and now approached cautiously, her expression a mixture of scientific fascination and religious awe. "Your Highness," she began, seeming unsure of the proper protocol for addressing a 200-year-old quantum consciousness. "The legends say you sacrificed yourself to save Lyria from destruction, that you bound your consciousness to prevent something catastrophic." Althea nodded, her expression growing solemn. "The Void Plague," she confirmed. "A weapon deployed in the final days of the war. A self-replicating quantum virus designed to unravel reality itself, to convert matter into anti-energy in an ever-expanding wave of destruction." She gestured around them at the temple. "This facility was our last hope, a quantum prison to contain the plague, sealed with a consciousness that could adapt and respond to its attempts to escape. My consciousness. But the great catastrophe still happened," Auric pointed out. 200 years ago, something devastated the surface, left the ruins we live in today. "A partial breach," Althea acknowledged, her grip tightening on her sword. "The seal weakened as my physical form degraded. A fraction of the plague escaped, causing localized destruction before I could reinforce the containment. I was forced to deepen my quantum sleep, to devote more of my consciousness to maintaining the seal." Her gaze grew distant. "I have been aware, in a limited way, of the passing years, of the struggle of my people to survive in the aftermath. It has been painful to witness." A sudden tremor shook the chamber, more violent than before. Cracks appeared in the ancient stone, and several of the quantum processors around the central platform sparked and went dark. "The seal is failing," Althea said, alarm evident in her voice. "My awakening has destabilized the containment. Without the sword in place to channel my consciousness, the Void Plague will break free completely." "What can we do?" Auric asked, instinctively moving closer to her, ready to help, despite barely understanding the forces at play. Althea's expression was grim, but resolute. "I must return to my sleep, place the sword back in its pedestal, reseal my sarcophagus, and reinforce the quantum prison. Another 200 years, perhaps more, until a permanent solution can be found." "No!" The word escaped Auric before he could consider it, surprising even himself with its vehemence. "There has to be another way. You've already given 200 years of your life to protect a world that's forgotten you. There has to be a different solution." Elaine stepped forward, her engineer's mind clearly racing. "The quantum technology of your era was far advanced beyond our current understanding, but we've preserved some knowledge. If the plague is contained in a quantum prison, perhaps we could relocate it rather than simply containing it here. Launch it into deep space or into Verdania's sun." Althea considered this, her ethereal features thoughtful. "The containment field is integrated with my consciousness. To move it would require moving me as well, and the risk of breach during transfer would be catastrophic." Another tremor rocked the chamber, more severe than the last. Beyond the defensive rings, the remaining toxic Vein Gang members and Nexus Tech security forces had apparently declared a temporary truce in the face of the growing danger. working together to evacuate the temple. "We're running out of time," Althea said, raising her sword. "I must return to my vigil." Auric caught her wrist, a boldness born of desperation. "Wait. You said the containment is linked to your consciousness, split between your physical form and the sword. What if we could reunite them fully? Strengthen your consciousness enough to control the plague without requiring the suspended animation?" "That would require a massive influx of quantum energy," Althea replied, but there was a hint of hope in her voice. "Energy that no longer exists in this fallen world." "What about the dragon?" Elaine interjected, excitement breaking through her usual pragmatism. "The murals throughout the complex show you riding a dragon, a biological mechanical construct powered by quantum energy. If it still exists somewhere, could its power source be repurposed?" Althea's eyes widened. "Solarius," she whispered, the name clearly meaningful to her. "My companion, my mount. He was placed in stasis when I entered the sarcophagus, his quantum core preserved to power the initial sealing ritual." She turned toward a section of the wall that appeared no different from the rest. Yet when she approached it, hidden seams appeared, revealing a massive chamber beyond. Inside, suspended in a stasis field, similar to Althea's sarcophagus, but far larger, was a creature out of legend. Part biological organism, part mechanical construct. The dragon was a marvel of Golden Age bioengineering. Its scales gleamed with a metallic luster, and through transparent sections of its chest, a pulsing quantum core could be seen, a miniature star contained within a living being. "His core contains enough energy to reintegrate my consciousness fully," Althea confirmed, her voice thick with emotion as she gazed upon her long-dormant companion. "But to extract it would mean his death. I cannot ask that sacrifice of him." As if in response to her voice, the dragon's eyes, massive orbs of the same stellar blue as Althea's, slowly opened. A rumbling sound, part mechanical, part organic, emanated from the great beast as it recognized its rider after 2 centuries of separation. Althea approached the stasis field, placing her hand against it. "Old friend," she murmured, "I had hoped never to wake you to a world so changed." The dragon's consciousness seemed to communicate with hers on some level Auric couldn't perceive. But the result was evident in Althea's expression, a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "He offers his core willingly," she said, turning back to Auric and Elaine. "He has been aware, as I have, of the passing years. He knows the seal is failing, and that his power could save countless lives." Another violent tremor shook the temple. This one sustained longer than the previous ones. Warning lights flashed across the quantum processors, and a low, ominous hum began to build from beneath the floor. "We need to act now," Elaine urged, already examining the systems around the dragon's stasis chamber with a practiced eye. "I can reconfigure the quantum transfer protocols, create a pathway for the core's energy to flow directly into your consciousness matrix. But I'll need help. The systems are ancient, and some of the connections have degraded." Auric stepped forward without hesitation. "Tell me what to do." As Elaine rapidly issued instructions, Auric found himself working alongside Althea, their hands moving in concert across control panels and energy conduits. Despite her royal status and quantum nature, there was something profoundly human in her focused determination, in the way she adapted to his suggestions when modern technical knowledge proved useful in bridging gaps in the ancient systems. While they worked, the temple continued to deteriorate around them. The defensive rings flickered and failed one by one, allowing the evacuation of the remaining survivors, but also exposing the central platform to the growing instability. The quantum prison beneath them was visibly weakening, patches of unnatural darkness appearing in the air, like tears in the fabric of reality itself, the first tendrils of the void plague testing its boundaries. "It's ready," Elaine announced at last, sweat streaking the grime on her face, her eyes bright with the thrill of working with technology centuries beyond her time. The transfer pathway is established. When the stasis field drops, the dragon's core will channel directly into the princess's consciousness matrix, bypassing the sword as a medium. Althea approached her dragon one last time, placing her hand against the stasis field. "Thank you, old friend," she whispered. "Your sacrifice will not be forgotten." The dragon rumbled in response, a sound that somehow conveyed both sorrow and acceptance. Then Althea stepped back, raising her sword in what appeared to be a formal salute to a fallen comrade. "Initiate the transfer," she commanded, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her luminous eyes. Elaine activated the sequence, and the stasis field around the dragon began to pulse, its energy signature changing as it prepared to release its captive. The dragon's quantum core glowed brighter, pulsing in synchronization with the sword in Althea's hand and the crown upon her brow. "Brace yourselves," Althea warned, as the energy built to a crescendo. "The transfer will release a significant quantum shockwave." Auric barely had time to take cover behind a fallen column before the stasis field collapsed completely. The dragon's form seemed to shimmer, becoming translucent as its physical matter began to dissolve. The quantum energy that had sustained it for centuries now flowing in a visible stream toward Althea. The princess stood at the center of the maelstrom, her form illuminated from within as she absorbed the massive influx of energy. Her features blurred, becoming momentarily indistinct, before resharpening with a clarity and presence that seemed more substantial than before. The sword in her hand blazed with internal light before gradually dimming, its purpose, as a separate consciousness vessel, no longer necessary. A final tremor shook the temple as the transfer completed. The dragon's physical form entirely converted to energy, leaving only a faint outline in the air, like an afterimage. Then a shockwave of blue light expanded outward from Althea, racing through the chamber and beyond, sealing the tears in reality that had begun to form, reinforcing the quantum prison that contained the void plague. When the light faded, Althea stood transformed. The slight transparency that had characterized her form was gone, replaced by a solid physicality. Her royal robes had been replaced by a form-fitting armor that seemed to be composed of the same material as the dragon's scales, and the crown upon her brow now incorporated elements of her mount's crest, a physical manifestation of their combined essence. "It is done," she announced, her voice resonant with new power. "The plague is contained once more, the prison reinforced. I am whole again, no longer divided between sword and flesh." Auric approached cautiously, awed by her transformation. "Does this mean you don't have to return to the sarcophagus? You're free?" Althea nodded, a smile of wonder spreading across her face. "Free, yet still bound by duty. The prison requires my consciousness to maintain it, but no longer my physical suspension. I can walk in the world again while still fulfilling my obligation as guardian." "Your Highness," Elaine said, stepping forward with a formal bow that seemed at odds with her practical nature. "The world above is very different from the one you left behind. The great catastrophe destroyed much of what you knew. Your people live in ruins and struggle for survival." "Then they will need their queen more than ever," Althea replied, her determination evident. "I have slept long enough while my kingdom suffered. It is time to rebuild, to reclaim what was lost." Another tremor shook the temple, but this one was different. Not the warning of a failing quantum prison, but the more mundane danger of structural collapse. The energy release had destabilized the already ancient structure. "We need to leave," Auric urged, looking up at the cracking ceiling. "This entire complex is coming down." Althea nodded, raising her sword. With a gesture, she created a shimmering pathway through the air, a quantum bridge leading upward. "This will take us to the surface. Quickly now." They raced along the bridge, the temple collapsing behind them as they ascended through levels of the underground city, through abandoned corridors and forgotten chambers, always upward toward the faint light of day, visible far above. As they neared the surface, Auric glanced back to see Vark, still partially frozen in the quantum stasis Althea had placed him in, struggling to follow them up the disintegrating bridge. Despite everything the man had done, Auric couldn't simply leave him to die. "Wait!" he called to Althea. "There's still someone down there." Althea followed his gaze, her expression hardening at the sight of the man who had threatened to enslave her consciousness. For a moment, Auric feared she would leave Vark to his fate, but then her features softened slightly. "Even the unworthy deserve mercy," she conceded, extending her hand and using her quantum abilities to pull Vark up to their level of the bridge, though she maintained the partial stasis that prevented him from using his weapons. "Justice, not vengeance, will be the foundation of my new reign." They emerged from the ruins into the harsh daylight of Verdania's surface, the twin suns high overhead, the radiation fog swirling around them. The ground continued to shake as the underground complex collapsed in on itself, sealing away the quantum prison and the remnants of the Sun Temple for all time. Auric's supervisor and extraction team were waiting at a safe distance, their expressions ranging from relief at his survival to shock at the sight of the woman in dragon-scale armor who accompanied him. Elaine's Nexus Tech colleagues had similarly established a perimeter, weapons trained uncertainly on the newcomers. Althea stood tall, surveying the ruins of what had once been the shining capital of her kingdom. Despite the devastation, there was no despair in her bearing, only a fierce determination that seemed to radiate from her like heat from a flame. "My people," she addressed the assembled scavengers and corporate agents, her voice carrying with unnatural clarity across the rubble-strewn landscape. "I am Althea, last queen of Lyria, returned from a sleep of 2 centuries to find my kingdom in ashes. I come not to claim dominion over you, but to offer hope, hope that what was broken can be mended, what was lost can be reclaimed." There was a stunned silence as her words sank in, the assembled humans trying to reconcile the legend of the Dragon Queen with the very real woman who stood before them. Then, slowly, Auric stepped forward to stand beside her, followed a moment later by Elaine. "I've spent my life searching through ruins for glimpses of the Golden Age," Auric said, addressing his fellow scavengers. "Digging through the past in hopes of understanding what we lost. But now, we have a living link to that past. Not just artifacts to study, but knowledge to rebuild." Elaine nodded in agreement. "The corporations have been fighting over scraps, reverse engineering fragments of technology we barely understand. But with the princess's guidance, we could do more than scavenge. We could create a new." Althea looked at her 2 advocates with gratitude, then turned her attention back to the wary crowd. "I do not ask for blind obedience or unearned loyalty. Judge me by my actions in the days to come. But know this, Lyria will rise again, not as a monument to past glory, but as a beacon for a new age, one that learns from the mistakes that led to our downfall." The radiation fog seemed to thin around her as she spoke, whether through some quantum ability or merely the force of her presence, allowing the sunlight to illuminate the ruins more clearly. And in that light, Auric could see something he had never truly noticed before. Amid the broken towers and crumbled streets, new growth had taken root, verdant plants, adapted to the post-catastrophe environment, twined around fallen columns and burst through cracked pavement. Nature reclaiming what civilization had abandoned. It was, he realized, a perfect metaphor for what Althea offered. Not a return to the past, but a new beginning that incorporated the best of what had come before, while adapting to present realities. In the days that followed, as word spread of the returned queen, people began to gather in the ruins of Lyria. Some came out of curiosity, others out of desperation, and a few out of a genuine belief in the legends that had persisted through 2 centuries of hardship. Althea established her court not in a palace, but in a repurposed mining facility on the edge of the ruins, working alongside engineers and laborers to create a functional base of operations. Her quantum abilities proved invaluable, allowing her to cleanse radiation hotspots and activate dormant Golden Age technology that had lain useless for generations. Auric found himself appointed as her chief of excavation and reclamation. His years of experience navigating ruins now directed towards systematic recovery rather than mere scavenging. Elaine became the Queen's scientific advisor, bridging the gap between ancient quantum knowledge and modern engineering principles. Even Vark, once his quantum stasis was lifted, found a place in the new order. His tactical knowledge and leadership abilities redirected toward organizing defense against the mutated creatures that roamed the wasteland and the corporate interests that viewed Althea's growing influence with suspicion. 3 months after her awakening, Althea stood with Auric and Elaine on a newly constructed observation platform, watching as the first reclaimed atmospheric processor hummed to life, its energy field expanding to cleanse a section of the radiation fog that had blanketed Lyria for 2 centuries. "It's working," Elaine said, checking the readings on her scanner with evident satisfaction. "The radiation levels are dropping exactly as predicted. If we can bring the other 4 processors online, we could clear the entire central district within a year." "And the agricultural domes?" Althea inquired, her gaze fixed on the gradually clearing sky. "The first seeds were planted yesterday," Auric reported, "using the soil remediation techniques from your archives. We should see germination within days, rather than months." Althea nodded, a smile of quiet pride touching her lips. "This is but the beginning," she said softly. "The quantum prison still requires my attention, and there are greater challenges ahead. But for the first time in 2 centuries, I feel true hope for Verdania's future." Auric followed her gaze to where a group of children, a rare sight in the wasteland before Althea's return, played among newly established gardens, their laughter carrying on the cleansed air. "The legends always said you sacrificed yourself to save the world," he commented. "They never mentioned you'd come back to save it again." "Legends often focus on endings," Althea replied, her stellar eyes reflecting the twin suns overhead. "But life is about beginnings, about cycles of renewal and growth." She placed a hand on the railing, her dragon-scale armor gleaming in the sunlight. "And this, my friends, is only our first chapter." As if to punctuate her words, a distant rumble shook the platform, not the familiar tremor of unstable ruins, but something deeper, more primal. Althea's expression shifted, a flash of concern crossing her features, before she masked it. "What was that?" Elaine asked, checking her scanner for seismic activity. "Nothing to concern ourselves with today," Althea said, her tone casual, but her eyes betraying a deeper worry. "There are other sealed chambers beneath Lyria, other quantum prisons containing threats from the final war. They are secure for now." But Auric, who had spent months working closely with the Queen, recognized the subtle tension in her posture. "But not forever," he guessed, keeping his voice low enough that only she and Elaine could hear. Althea met his gaze directly, her honesty one of the qualities that had earned his unwavering loyalty. "No, not forever," she admitted. "There is another curse, deeper than the one I contained, waiting to be addressed. But that is a challenge for another day, when we are stronger." The rumble came again, like the stirring of something ancient and vast, then subsided into silence. Around them, the work of rebuilding continued, unaware of the sleeping threat far below. But as Auric watched Althea turn her face toward the clearing sky, determination etched in every line of her bearing, he felt not fear, but anticipation. Whatever waited in the depths, whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together. The Queen returned from time, the engineer who bridged past and present, and the scavenger who had thought he'd found just a sword, only to discover a new purpose and a world reborn.